Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
The book is called The Greater Generation in Defense of the Baby Boom Legacy, and the author's premise is that it's actually the baby boom generation that is the greater generation. So I think the book is going to be kind of controversial. So today, most of you probably know Maureen Dowd. If you read her column, her new book is called Are Men Necessary When Sexes Collide? It's sort of her take on the eternal battle of the sexes, I guess you'd say. And Cailin Brown, who's our reviewer, I don't know, oh, there she is. She herself is also a columnist, and she's taught journalism at many area colleges, and I think she's worked at every paper in the area, from what she told me, and she's currently assistant professor of public communications down in St. Rose. So here she is to tell us about the book, Are Men Necessary?
Hi. I know some of you. It's fun. Some people I haven't seen in a while. When Joe first asked me to do this, I had briefly familiarized myself with only the title. And I'm a person who often arrives at a conclusion very quickly. So I had to step back after I had considered the title, Are Men Necessary? I was concerned about the title, and I am still concerned about the title and the content, but I'll talk to you about my thoughts on this. I've prepared some comments on it. I'm probably more interested, if you've read it, what you think about it, or if you haven't read it, your thoughts on her weekly, twice-a-week column. You may get that in the Times Union or read it in the Times. If you read it in the Times, you would have to go online and pay for it. So that's an interesting little caveat about accessing Mrs. Dowd. Feel free to stop me, too, if any thoughts arise. Thank you for inviting me to talk about Maureen Dowd's latest endeavor, as it were, Are Men Necessary? This syndicated political columnist for the New York Times is talked about at office water coolers, especially in newsrooms, at faculty meetings at the State House, and of course in the Beltway. Her column writing over the years has tackled incredibly sensitive and important issues, ranging from the appointments of U.S. Supreme Court justices to the current war in Iraq. Those who follow her weekly columns are well familiar with her ability to take an unusual look at the news and to offer a spin that is often unique and often biting. In 1999, in a magazine I subscribed to and read at the time religiously, called Brill's Content, Maureen Dowd was the subject of a cover profile that did not include her input because she declined to participate. And I cannot resist sharing this cover with you because it's funny. And you can't access this magazine now. This is no longer around. That says the op-ed vixen. But do you see her? Can you see her? This magazine only lasted a few years and took as its primary purpose for publication the responsibility of monitoring the news and its delivery systems, including columnists, and holding those news producers up to criticism. The magazine failed in part because there was not enough interest in its content beyond the media it wrote about. Some media professionals loved reading it because it was criticism of all the different media outlets, but the general public never bid. So they didn't have a general circulation subscribership. But in this profile in this magazine, which surveyed some of the individuals who were the subject of Dowd's writings, the magazine made this assertion: few people questioned Dowd's talent or her column's entertainment value. I tend to agree with this assessment made by that individual who profiled Dowd at the time. But that observation was made about Dowd's columns, not about the book we are considering today. And as I showed you, here's the cover of this magazine. It illustrates Dowd holding a big lollipop in one hand. Now this is indicative of the sweet Maureen and how she entices her prey into the lair. and this is how the text in the magazine describes her. And frankly, having been a reporter for 16 years, it's a great tactic. It works, you know? I teach my students you start out sweet because otherwise you're not going to get your story. So first you need to engage your source, get them interested, get the information you need, and save the automatic weapon she has in her other hand for later. All right, and if you need to use that, which is what's under consideration as well. So it shows her with the automatic weapon and crisscrossed over her chest, ample ammunition, which is Maureen's signature card. Okay, so you have a sense. Inside the magazine, though, is a more telling headline. The name of the story is called In Search of Maureen Dowd. It introduces the magazine's quest to find out what lies behind this controversial writer. Some 100 people were interviewed for the story, a number of whom were subjects Dowd had interviewed for her own columns. The magazine reported that some of those same individuals felt blindsided by the results of Dowd's work. When I first heard the title of her new book, Are Men Necessary? I have to show you this because if you haven't seen it, this cover is extraordinary. It's a cartoon caricature of her, and it certainly fits in well with the vixen scenario portrayed back in '99. We have her dressed in a red dress. It's a cartoon character of a beautifully figured woman. And it was her decision to use this artwork. So this is interesting how she has framed herself for public consumption. Anyway, In Search of Maureen Dowd, the title of the article, wants to find out what's behind her. 100 people were interviewed. The magazine reported that some of those same people were upset by her responses, but when I looked at this and I heard the name, I smirked. When Joe asked me to do it, I thought, my feminist closet person inside reacted, oh, this'll be fun. Are men necessary? I can imagine what I could do with this. After one read, and I read it immediately after I spoke with Joe, I needed to put it down and think about it. But I took a second read, and I think that indeed our so-called op-ed vixen has helped to answer the question that was posed in Brill's story 7 years ago when it started its search for Maureen Dowd. We now have insight into who she is. It comes out in this book. This latest book is an amplification of Dowd's daily musings, only she continues to treat her subjects with a droll sense of superficiality and vitriol that is not sustainable in a 338-page book. Imagine her column running for 338 pages. That's what it is. For me. I'm interested in your thoughts. Maureen Dowd is a master of the nuances of pop culture. She uses her knowledge and experiences with consumerism to describe and explain her assessment of the human condition, a trait perfected in her twice-weekly columns. In this instance, Are Men Necessary? Dowd employs somewhat of a stream of consciousness approach to her writing when she chooses to observe the developing condition of humankind. Both men and women fall within her sights in this book, though it appears the actual title of her work is merely a sensationalistic tease aimed at attracting readers. Though on that front, we see that the book's popularity is already waning. Yesterday's report on Amazon.com showed that her book ranked 2,324, down from just 1,727 a day earlier. Perhaps those numbers are telling. The Amazon report also showed that the same individuals who viewed Dowd's book on Amazon had also logged on to learn about Ariel Levy's Female Chauvinist Pigs, Women and the Rise of Raunch Culture, and the book Why Men Don't Have a Clue and Women Always Need More Shoes, the ultimate guide to the opposite sex. So these people are looking into those same books. Since I am unfamiliar with these books, except for what I read on Amazon, and frankly this genre of literature, I will leave it to you to consider what may have drawn readers into the fold of our columnist's latest work. In each of her chapters, Dowd frames men and women in particular ways that suit her purposes, which it seems in this instance is to lament the state of the relationship between the sexes through her prism of cynicism. She spends quite a bit of time contemplating the rituals of dating, primarily from a heterosexual perspective, and concludes that the system of dating is ultimately flawed. She both cherishes and laments the fact that her late mother tried to prepare her for interactions with men when she delivered to her daughter the following books: On Becoming a Woman, 365 Ways to Cook Hamburger and Other Ground Meats, and this is the punch right here, and How to Catch and Hold a Man, which from what I can discern was one of her primary motivating factors and continues to be throughout her dating life. So that's informing and has informed her, from what I can figure, throughout her evolution. This last title, however, is the book that seems to be the one that has informed Dowd's recipe for living and critique, and the one that may indeed help to bring us closer in the elusive search for the real Dowd. In her treatment of the dating ritual, Dowd relies heavily on quoting a series of individuals, many of whom she draws from her inner circle. In fact, a good portion of the sourcing of this book she attributes directly to her friends in the publishing industry, Times writers, publicists, and those in the proverbial know. She rarely branches out beyond the upper echelon, those out there working for a living, raising families, struggling with the relationship conundrum. Her sources are those with the means to participate in the consumer culture of which she is so critical. They are far from the majority. The dating anecdotes she relies on provide the reader with pithy, short quotes that yield only a surface treatment of the topics she explores, such as the financial responsibilities of the dating ritual. On page 40, Dowd asserts that women say they want old-fashioned courting, even though fleeting sexual encounters are common on college campuses. Not one to believe everything I read, and that comes from a lifetime of writing for newspapers, I decided to take this and other of Dowd's assertions on dating to the playing field. I asked my students to consider these assertions. What might college students think of Dowd's claims? Of the 30 students I asked to fill out an oversimplified questionnaire on the proposition, do women want old-fashioned courting? 31 students told me women do want old-fashioned courting, and 5 told me they did not. When Dowd further explored the intricacies of the male-female balancing act, she posited that men going for long-term relationships would rather marry women in subordinate jobs than women who are supervisors. To that, 11 of those same students said that indeed men would prefer to marry women who were employed in subordinate positions, and 26 of those students said men would not prefer to marry a woman in a subordinate position. I like learning from my students. I find that they bring a lot to the classroom. This little sampling is far from scientific, but for me, reinforces Dowd's positions that there remains a great confusion among the relationships between men and women. But in her book, she seems to relay a sense of exasperation over such insignificant cultural mores as a question of how women should be addressed. Is it Miss, Mrs., Ms., or Doctor? What do women want to be called? Why, Dowd wonders, after the advent of feminism, a movement from which she benefited but readily acknowledges did not participate in early, do women now want to take their husbands' names? She seems to suggest that this move is a sin, an unspeakable error. But she doesn't consider the practicalities of naming, especially for those of us who are mothers. I know many mothers who have an easier time maneuvering through grammar school registrations, brownies, Cub Scouts, basketball, and soccer, and all of the other trappings that come with parenting because they opted to keep one name in the family. I know for me it wasn't some big conspiracy against all things feminist. It just made plain good sense. And parenthetically, might I add, I should say, I still use my birth name professionally. So at school, I have the name of my children, and here she expresses further incredulity when she says on page 62 that 5 years ago she heard high-powered women fantasizing about having a wife to shop, cook, and carpool because from where she sits, now more want to be that wife. And this is upsetting to Maureen Dowd, that there is a group of women who now want to stay home, take care of their husbands and the kiddies. This is unnerving to her. The change in name usage, the seeming gravitation toward more stay-at-home moms, all signify to Dowd that perhaps, as she states, women are devolving. In this book of hers, she spends a great amount of time compartmentalizing people into neat packages, wrapped up in particular ways. Women are backing off from the cause, she thinks, and it troubles her. But later in the book, she contradicts herself and does it more than once. When she refers to the late Katharine Graham, the publisher of the Washington Post, she does so reverentially, relying repeatedly on the title of Mrs., the way one might say, Mr. President. But we get further insight into our author when she more than once positions herself as a victim and refers to herself as a girl. She writes, "When I first started in journalism in the mid-'70s, it was a perilous time to be a girl." I'm not certain that that sort of self-reference is helpful to her argument that women should keep their maiden names and stay in the workforce. Yes, Dowd thrives on sarcasm, and while her wit is not lost on me, it works better in a finite column where a writer is allotted only several hundred words rather than hundreds of pages. The quick wit, the repeated pop culture references, and the desire to cut down whatever gets in her way are tedious. And there's no relief. There's no relief from her constant haranguing for me. Later in the book, she faults Colin Powell for refusing to conduct an interview with her after he so readily gives interviews to many other male reporters. She blames it on gender persecution to an extent. Dowd, the victim. What she doesn't do is turn the magnifying glass on her own public persona, her tactics, and consider whether or not it would be in anyone's best interest to talk to her. After all, those interviewed in the magazine article with Brill felt almost betrayed and certainly bewildered after interactions with the great Dowd. At one point in her career, 60 Minutes producer Don Hewitt contacted her for an interview, and she declined after looking at all the goop and glop she had smeared on her face in service to beauty. She doesn't make the correlation about her extreme criticism of all the women who have regressed to plastic surgery and Botox in their quest for beauty. But more importantly, from my perspective, she doesn't recognize that she shut down one of the most credible television news programs, thereby managing public perception of her. She does not afford that same gatekeeping quality to her column subjects, however. Women, she fears, are giving up on authenticity. Well, Ms. Dowd, when Joe Nash here at the Colonie Library invited me to visit, we talked about your public persona. Our conversation resorted to the fact that she'd become a parody of herself. This book is an example of her inability to step back and see what is really happening. What she writes about cannot be portrayed in the kind of black and white of newspaper print. The reality of relationships are much more nuanced than she gives us information about. She claims feminism has been defeated by narcissism because in her circles, all the women are preening and making up and posturing in an effort to do what? Get a man? My circles are far different. A column writer, yes. Raised a Catholic like her, yes. With brothers, yes. But unlike Ms. Dowd, I am grateful for men, for the father who sacrificed throughout his life to help my siblings and I prosper, for my husband who has nurtured me, and interestingly, during Valentine's week, on Valentine's night, while everyone else was dating, he was listening to me critique Maureen Dowd. And to a son like my daughter, who is absolutely necessary. Thank you. I said to my husband, I'm doing what I don't like about her. She is a half-empty person to me, but I don't know her. You've met her. I've never met Maureen Dowd. I only have read her. And I think she is a good columnist. And for instance, yesterday her article on the Cheney scenario was excellent. I think she produces many excellent columns. But I don't think this helps get her message across. I think that she really did a stream of consciousness piece of writing here that fails to come up with solutions. I'm a solutions journalism-oriented sort of person. I think the purpose of journalism, of which I think this fits into, should be based on providing solutions to citizenry and to the people. Don't just leave us hanging. Don't just tell us the problems. How are you going to help us solve the problems? She presents this, and a number of other reviewers talk about the fact, no solutions. This is a big problem, and she's telling us about the battle of the sexes in the year 2006. Isn't it time somebody offered solutions? And her, she's able to write for the New York Times. That's the greatest privilege. Your voice is out there. Let's be productive and generative and constructive instead of destructive. Well, that's a beautiful Maureen Dowd question, because Maureen, from what I can learn from her, and just her book jacket, and on the other side, she's wearing a beautiful black chiffon see-through top. She definitely uses her sex to her advantage, from what I can gather. And again, you've met her, I haven't. I can't answer that. What would I think of her if she were older? Do I like Ellen Goodman, who's been a columnist for the Boston Globe forever? Yes. Did I read them both on the same day last week following Coretta Scott King's funeral? Yes. Did they come at it from different perspectives? Absolutely. But I had this sense from Goodman of a positive message, and I think it's hard for Dowd to be constructive, and I know she's sarcastic and people think she's funny. And she's funny to a point, but then what? What about it? I want more. I'm not satisfied, Iola. And that's interesting, because what you said is how she starts the book, very nostalgically, talking about how she wished for the days of Gene Kelly and Singing in the Rain. And I don't know if that's actually the exact reference, but it's that idea, Astaire and Rogers. She's very nostalgic for that, and was raised at a time when the male-female relationship was more romanticized than people might think of it now. I don't mean she herself as a person is half empty. Her view and her critique always looks at what's wrong, never how it might be improved or fixed. But you can see that's a good thing that's happening there. I wrote a column today for the Syracuse Post-Standard about a project in Albany called Park South. And there are two ways to look at that, or many more than two, actually. But one of the stories I read talked about the detriment, the problems that would be caused by knocking down city blocks and improving it. And I talked about the benefits of that. Now, does that mean I'm great? No. It just means I'm trying to look for something positive, and I like to read that. That's what I like to read. I like to see that someone's trying to put a positive spin, find the positive, exploit the positive, so maybe the broken windows theory will kick in and there will be more positive to come out of a particular perspective. But she is filled. She's a genius. I don't think of her as an empty person. I just think her viewpoint on how she assesses what she's critiquing is always negative. And is that the job of a columnist? That's something for us to think about. Is that what a columnist should do? I take journalism very seriously because it's my life's work and I'm training future journalists. So it is hard for me to step back from the power she has. If any of you who are reading her on a regular basis, she's influencing either way how you're perceiving of what's happening in this world. So she has a lot of opportunity to influence what happens. She does. She also brings up a lot of anecdotal information about different species in the insect world and how different bugs eat their mates. So she uses a lot of anecdotal evidence, all in good fun. It is. It's meant in good fun. But it's such an incendiary title, and it does worry me. It doesn't detract from or contribute to the conversation. For me, it doesn't either. I would not recommend, in the end result, as I studied reviewing, I do not recommend that you spend $25.95 for this book. Get it from your library and read it. But sincerely, I think that it's worth reading. I don't know if you'll be able to sustain the baud rate. She moves at such a fast clip, and she never stops because it truly is like an extended column. And that's hard to take. Maureen Dowd for 380 pages. It's a lot. So I would, for health purposes, recommend you take this. A chapter a night. Yes. I agree that the more people, any one of us, talk to and with, that there's something to be learned, truly. In her circles, she interviews high-powered women all the time, on a daily basis. And her reference to Katharine Graham, now that's a book I'd recommend. Katharine Graham's autobiography is a superb book, the publisher of the Washington Post. And she clearly has great respect for that woman who died a few years ago. But she has had an opportunity to interact with many women who have achieved a lot, and she is appreciative of what they have achieved. She wonders about the fact that many of these women, according to her, have missed the opportunity to be mothers and or wives and or significant others because of the demands of their careers. And I do wonder if, in fact, Maureen Dowd thinks the same thing about herself. I wondered that. I felt sad for Maureen Dowd, really, when I got done with it. I'm not mad at her because I don't have the energy to be mad at her. But I feel sad for her that this is her perspective, you know, this is how she sees it. But yes, she would benefit from talking to those women. She also talks about all the Harvard graduates she interviewed, female graduates, who opted to stay at home after they earned their MBAs at Harvard. And she wonders about them, and she finds it very perplexing that after feminism, these women would opt to change diapers and carpool instead of getting into the workforce. And she thinks that that is an injustice, and I think she believes it's a disservice to womanhood that you would have that great education and the ability to perform in the workforce and then opt out of the workforce. That's great and insightful about reporters and their perspectives, because having been at the Times Union for 10 years, I know that it's very difficult to satisfy all readers and sources because it's a particular viewpoint. You see it from a particular point of view, which is different from another person's point of view. And when I'm working with my would-be journalists at St. Rose, I talk about very early on the inability for any reporter to be objective, and that it's important that the news try to move away from that and not perpetuate the myth that there is such a thing as objectivity, because it doesn't exist. So why pretend it does? I have a point of view. My name's on the story. Even if I'm not a columnist, the fact my name is on the story means I saw it, I sourced it, I wrote it. It's not a nameless, it wasn't generated from nowhere. And when everybody walked in the door here, we didn't leave all our baggage at the door and our histories and our birth order and everything about our families. You know, we came in with all our baggage, and that's what happens to reporters. And they see it a particular way, but then try to feign that they can be neutral. It's not intended. It's just a myth that is continually perpetuated. I don't want you to stop reading her, but I'm not encouraging that. But it's, you know, when you look at this, if you haven't already, these are just ideas to consider. Thank you.